yesterday at Bible study with some of the guys, we were sort of touching up on some of these subjects. Um, so when we look at it in that kind of a context, it's very important to realize that Satan isn't necessarily like when it says you will become like gods, right? It's not necessarily a. I got to be careful what I say here. A false statement because it seems to be that God intended for
Yes.
humans to actually do it this way. It's just not the way Satan wants this thing to happen is just not the way God wants it to happen, and that's really what's at odds here.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's been a lot of misreading of the Genesis narrative. I'm very partial to Irenaeus's reading, where he says, "Look, the issue here is that uh, God has his purposes for the perfection of the human race." And his Gnostic opponents say, "Yeah, but you believe in creation out of nothing. God's all powerful. Why didn't he just create us perfect from the beginning? Why didn't
Mm-hmm.
he make us gods or immortal from the very beginning? Couldn't he have done that?" And Irenaeus says, "Well, no, he couldn't have actually. Even an omnipotent God cannot do certain things by fiat if those things require processes. And deification is something that requires growth and development in virtue and, of course, union with God." And he says, "Well, what you've got here, you've got the two trees, and these are both great trees. And Adam and Eve are fooled into eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They're like little kids, right? They've been told, no, don't touch that. Now, maybe later God is going to say, okay, you can go ahead and have that. You're ready for it. But they eat of it prematurely." And Irenaeus observes that they're recently created. And we have a lot of ancient texts that speculate about how long before the fall. And about as long as it comes is 3 days or so,
Oh.
right? Is it a few hours? Is it a few days? Maybe a few weeks. But right, people generally understood that the story is saying that we are part of a race that fell very quickly after
Mm.
creation. And though Adam and Eve may look like adults, they're young, they're immature, they haven't gotten the experience that leads to virtue and growth in steadfastness and obedience and whatnot. The devil comes along through the serpent and fools them to partake of this thing. And note that the serpent's uh, uh, words insinuate that God is being stingy. Right? God knows that when you eat of it, you're going to become like him. Well, that's what Genesis 1 said humanity was made to
Yeah.
be, right? His likeness and image. And so at that point, the serpent isn't lying, right? He knows God is going to make you like him, but he makes it out as if God is withholding this thing necessary for it because he's stingy and doesn't want them to
Mm.
have it. And then, of course, Eve looks at the tree and sees that it is good for food, a delight for the eye, and desirable to make one wise. And the narrative doesn't suggest that she was wrong about that. All right. And Irenaeus's claim is, look, had they persisted in obedience, they would have eventually grown to where they could handle it, and God would have said, "Go for it."
Mm.
It's like, say, your kids, right? I'm training one of my kids to drive right now, my 19-year-old son. Um, there was a time where if he was in the car and he were to play with the keys, I would have probably slapped his hand and say, "Hey, don't do that, right? Don't touch the keys." All right. If he's 3 or 4 years old, I don't want my son touching the keys of the car. Bad things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We hear periodically of these stories of 9 and 10-year-old kids who decide they're going to go on a road trip and they take their mom's car at 5 in the morning and, end up in a wreck. We don't want that to happen. You're not ready for it. But now, right, my son is older, and it's like, I'm actually having to push him to get his driver's license. Like, come on, guy, you should have gotten this already, right? I mean, I have to actually pull the key out and say, "Hey, look, it's time to take you to work. You're driving." "Oh, do I have to?" "Yes, you have to. You need to get your hours in." And I think Irenaeus's reading of the fall has a lot going for it,
Mm.
and that we can combine that with some other biblical insights. The passages from Ezekiel that are often associated with the fall of the devil. If you read them, Eden gets mentioned there. Combine it with what Jesus says in John 9, you are of your father the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning and a liar. Well, the only time you see the devil murder and lie explicitly is in the garden story, taking the serpent as his vehicle. Not that necessarily it was understood that way originally. And he murders Adam and Eve by telling them a lie. And they partake of it, and it introduces death. And so I take it that, yeah, it's by craftily insinuating the wrong things, omitting things, that the lie is told in order to kill them. And why? Because, well, go back to Psalm 8. What is man that you're mindful of him? You have made him a little lower than the angels. And the Greek text, which the Epistle to the Hebrews picks up on, has it for a little while. Right? The Hebrew text is ambiguous as to, is this a permanent state of affairs? Is this a temporary state of affairs? All we know is that at the creation, humanity is a little lower than the Elohim. Right? In the Greek, it's the angeloi, the angels. Hebrews understands this based on the Greek text to mean humanity was created a little lower than the heavenly beings, but it was meant to eventually be over them. And I think if you combine all these things, you have a very good reason for why the devil would want to kill humanity. He doesn't want humanity to supersede the angelic order. He doesn't want humanity to be over the angels. And we have a number of early Christian texts that take it along these lines, where they see that what motivated the devil wasn't the idea of trying to take over God's throne. What he's out for is that throne which is promised to redeem humanity. And the jealousy is the jealousy that he has toward this newly created race of beings that God intends to be over the angelic host, with the angelic host being ministers
Yeah.
to them.